The other thing is that most likely you will see my granddaughter with us today. Will be my um I we'll see how long it takes before we get a tap on the door and she comes in. All right, so let's talk about any questions from last week. Does everybody understand where we are and what we're doing? Any questions at all?
Are we submitting week 4 on Canvas, all the assignments?
Yeah, yeah, for the
Okay, perfect.
quasi, yeah.
I wasn't sure because it was like it said week 3 was due. No, you go.
I thought I fixed that. Oh, I
I
kept
put
putting
all,
fixed. That's right.
I put all mine under week 3.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
That's
I
fine.
just didn't submit mine and I thought I'd ask. So I'll do that
Okay,
now.
that's I totally forgot. I sent somebody, I sent one person an email about it because it was being difficult, and because I was switching the date and it would not accept the date. I was trying to fix it too, and I just kept doing it over and over, and it didn't. And then I was going to come back to it. Sorry. So Rick, we were just talking about how still has the wrong date for this week for your materials, and I apologize because we are, you just submit as normal. Week 4 materials would be for today, so no
Okay,
problem.
thank you.
Yeah, it's all flexible. Um, but we are going to run through because I want to go through the experimental stuff still, even though we're on quasi experimental for today. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the randomized. And I think I have slides. Let me see because I pulled up, open the slides already. Nope, that's quasi. Cool, cool, cool. Let me hit open. Everything there. That's review for class 3. Oh, I've got one that says, okay, this will be it. This is the one. So I'm going to, I can't remember what if it makes it, because I've got the voice on this recording, as y'all heard, or some of you probably heard. Um, and this Bryce. Hey, Bryce, we're just getting started. No worries. I'm pulling up the slides. I'm going to share the slides. We're jumping ahead in to talk about experimental design, even though that was last week. And share screen. Yeah, there you are. Hopefully, hello, it works. All right. Can y'all see the experimental design? When I do this, is it still full screen? Or can you see the screen behind it? Does it make it small?
I can see your whole PowerPoint right now.
Okay. Can you see anything behind it?
No, just PowerPoint is open.
Okay, cool. Because I've got you guys to the side and I've got something else open to the side. So nice. Excellent. All right, flip through randomization, which is the gold standard. That's not to mean the gold standard for determining causality. See, I should, because that's not to mean that it's like not, that all the other designs are not important. Everything is important. It's, there are different times we use different things, right? So, what basics about experimental? Um, it has to have an active independent variable. You do not have, does anybody remember what the other kind is called?
An
And I was going
attribute.
to say again.
An attribute.
Yes, thank you. And it was funny because I was going to start calling on people in order, but Meg was first. So I was like, I'm not going to call on Meg first. Meg is Ricky and Bryce, y'all didn't hear, but Meg is, it's 4:30 in the morning for her. And she just traveled 22 hours. So she is excused from having to have any brain cells actually clicking this morning. She is welcome to participate as much as you want, and she's welcome to go to sleep. Anyway. Okay, yes. So what going in order. So Ricky, what do we mean by active independent variable?
Excuse me, I was eating the rest of my cookie from lunch.
You were doing that
Um,
very silly. I did not notice. So,
I appreciate it. So our independent variable is the thing that's making change, that's actively making change in our experiment or our design, our research design.
mhm. Yeah, and I think even more specifically when we're talking about experimental is that the researcher is the one that's actively manipulating
Okay, yeah.
something. So yeah, that just yeah. So you have an acti that's a new word. You have an active independent variable just like you do a quasi experimental design, but here's where I mentioned about the groups in a class last time, that if you have you have students in a class and you have two classes, and because we talked about is you're in two or is you're in 60, it depends on
Mhm.
yeah, who can argue better for the and it depends on what there are stats you can do, but you want to look at that baseline to make sure your groups really are equivalent. But be aware there are group effects that can happen if you do that. But anyway, because if it was a experimental design, you would actually assign both the treatment and the students to the classroom. Whereas in a quasi, you will only be able to assign the experiment to the classroom itself because the students are already in there. So that's the
So
difference.
rather than being assigned to the participants and the intervention.
Yes. So no, I'm
Okay.
saying that quasi, I'm kind of talking about both today since today's supposed to be
Yeah, no,
quasi.
that's what I was, sorry, I was making sure I have it right
Yes.
versus
So
quasi.
right. So quasi, we can randomize, but we cannot randomize the participants. So we can randomize which treatment, gets to the groups, but we cannot randomize participants. Whereas in an experimental design, you have to be able to randomize the participants as well, and that's going to eliminate the bias. So what are we? I mean, practically, what do we mean by that? I mean, what do we care about? How does that um, if you're not randomizing and you have these classes that have been together for say let's say that we're in January and they've been together all year, what can happen to your data um, if you're looking for, let's say, changes in intake of dairy after an intervention? What's a factor that, and I'll go ahead and pull again, make you keep popping up. I'll call on Sam. Sorry. So what could be going on that might be a problem if we have that design where we've, quasi, we didn't put the participants in the groups, but we did randomize the intervention to groups. And one of our groups received the drink more milk intervention and the other one didn't. And now we're looking at the data. What's one of our worries about that, measuring as the group as a unit of analysis?
You said if we have, sorry, I wasn't here last week, so I'm trying to,
Okay.
like, my
Yeah.
brain is so
Visualize.
fried from comps. But you said if we have two classes and if we assign one of them an intervention and the other one we don't. I mean,
Correct.
they're not, we don't know if, I mean, this might be completely wrong, but like, I mean, how do we know that like the groups are like comparable to one
Okay,
another?
that's definitely first. Yep, that's a big one. So you might have some bias in the types of groups. So you might, for instance, here I'm going to take this to a long. That does happen that principals know what So if this is third grade, and these are the same students who've been in class and the school for a while, as the principal assigns, if that's the person who does it, which students are in which classes, that principal actually knows what type of teacher A is. They know what type of teacher B is. And then they also know what kind of kids there are. And they might go, okay, well, all the troublemakers will do better in, teacher A class because of the way teacher A handles those kids who are disruptive and don't da da da. And so there's a lot of similarities. So you could have a bias in terms of which kids are in what class. Yes, definitely.
That's a
Um,
hilarious example. And I immediately go to my childhood friend that I wasn't allowed to be in class with.
yeah,
I
that's
was
exactly right.
thinking, would maybe the participants, the way you first framed it, I think you said it made me think of terms of like a cohort, like
Yes.
this class, we might start to influence each other's dietary patterns and things.
Yep, that's exactly where I was going to go. Yeah,
Okay,
and then I
cool.
just
I
followed
thought,
Sam's because it was
well, I thought so. I was gonna say phone a friend, because I think I followed that.
yeah,
Right.
yep,
Cool.
you had it exactly right. So it's just that Sam came up with another really good example that was
Yeah,
true.
no,
So
that was also great.
So yeah, what Ricky was saying is that, and that's why I put it in January as opposed to the beginning of the year, because I did give time for that group effect to occur. So you have these clusters of people who like each other a lot and kind of do everything together and emulate each other, and so you're going to have a lot of potential for influencing. So that's going to be an issue there. So when the other thing is, if we change the example around and we have adult class that's based on cooking, and so we have our intervention group, and then we have our control group. And so what happened, and everybody gets $200 for doing this 4 week. Okay, that's bad design. Let's do a 12 week just to be a good example. So yeah, make it long enough to actually impact that behavior change and continue. So they're going to get, let's say, $400. That makes my example even better. So we put up posters around town. We say $400 to participate. You can choose to be in this cooking class, or you can choose to just be in control group. We really need participants. Who wants to sign up? What's going to happen to our groups that we're going to have there? And your cooking class, yeah, Ricky, yes.
I feel like even the people who maybe don't get that placebo kind of, you don't have to do the cooking, the people who were supposed to cook then wouldn't, because why would it matter?
Yeah, and in this case, which is like an extreme bad case,
Yeah.
you would even more than that. You'd get the people who are interested in cooking sign up to be in the cooking class, and you get the people who just want $400 to be in the non-cooking class. And so you're much more likely to find those individuals not cooking as much, right? And you're less
Yeah.
likely to
And okay, I see what you're
so yeah,
saying.
so
Yeah.
you get this great effect in your cooking class, but it's actually just because your design is so poor. And so yeah, the better example there, just let's see, for Mamoon, I'm going to throw you a hard one here. You're next, sorry. What would be the better example if you have a situation where you're going to have two groups and you're going to be advertising for this cooking class? What kind of research design, pre-post still, what would you ideally do?
Uh, which research design I will choose?
No, give me the ideal. And an experimental design, what's the ideal?
Oh, for an experimental, it will be a randomized control trial.
Okay, so tell me how you're going to do that with our cooking class example for our adults that we're putting flyers up for.
I think I'll randomize the participant in control group and treatment group.
Okay. Yes, you would be wanting to randomize the participants. Talk to me about the recruitment. Let's back that up to recruitment. How would you be recruiting? And it is easy. I'm not trying to trick. It is easy.
I mean, you're asking about the process, how I will recruit them, or like,
Yeah, I mean, more of what are you communicating during recruitment as you trying to get people in the study? Because remember, a second ago, I made up this bad design where I said you get to recruit people to either be in this cooking class. They can choose to be in a cooking class, or they can choose to be in a control group. Both receive $400. And that we talked about the problems with that design. So how would we recruit in a better experimental design? I see
I,
Marissa's
I
on
think I,
board, so I'll get you a turn.
I think I will do the usual process, like do the announcement, flyer, and everything, and
Uh-huh.
then I will the participant who are interested, I will randomly assign them to a control group and the
Okay.
intervention
So
group.
the people who are interested in what are you advertising for them to do?
Uh, about the cooking class,
Yeah. Yeah. So you're advertising for them to be in a cooking class, right?
right?
And that's just across the board.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. So that's okay. And then you randomize them to either the cooking class or the intervention. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Marissa, following up on that, what is a good or kind, or I don't even know what uh, design to use in this for our intervention and control group? Because now you've signed it there. All these people said, "Oh, I want to be in this cooking class," and they're like, "Man, I got in the control group." What's a better way approach that we can take with that?
I was thinking about a wait list
Yes,
option.
you can do it. Yeah, you see, do a wait list. So what happens is, let's see, Meg, I'll give you an easy one. In our wait list design, are we going to give everybody a pre-test?
Yes.
Yes, good answer. Seth, you knew it was going to be an easy one. Okay. Bryce, you just get an easy one just because you're next on here. So what do we do next? This is an experimental design. We're now doing a controlled wait list. We've done pre-exam, pre-tests or surveys before. What do we do next in our study?
Start the clock until
Yes.
the next test. So we're waiting
Well-
until whatever that time frame is.
But what are we doing during that time? So you do pre-test and then research design. What do you do? What research actually that you're doing? This, again, totally easy. Not trying to trick you. Next thing the researcher is going to do is
I guess like creating groups or
okay.
put
You can
participants
say that
in
if
groups.
we pretend that we hadn't done our randomization. So you're randomizing to two different
Yeah.
groups. Okay, that's a the way. Ricky goes. You're next. Now we've randomized them to two groups. What do we do next in our design?
Sampling?
No, we've already got them. That's a great guess, though. So we already did our recruitment, which would be, we used, I guess, in this example, a convenient sample, which we can go into sampling more detail later. But say we already did that. That was up here.
So
in our convenient
start
sample.
changing variables.
So okay, right. You're gonna have to getting at it. So we're doing the intervention, right?
But this
So
would be where the researcher would start to manipulate the independent variable.
exactly, which in this case is a
I'm sorry.
in this example that we're using right now is a what? What are we doing with our experiment? Yeah, still working. It's easy. What are we doing with them?
Randomizing? I don't
We've
know.
already randomized. Bryce took the randomized. We randomized them to two groups.
Gathering
Now, what do
data,
you start next week? Yes.
statistics, data.
No, no.
Oh, okay. I
You're
don't know.
thinking too high level. This is
class.
really easy. Okay, I'm going to pick on Meg here because I think that we'll see if this Meg. What do you think the researcher does next? Really easy. You've done your big picture. Next.
Collecting data from the participants.
Okay, you're right. You and Rick, you're right. You're right. I hadn't actually done. Well, I said the pre, didn't I? No, I guess I didn't. Okay, we did pre-surveys. Okay, you got that right.
Right.
I skipped. Okay, so our duh factor. Sam, what do we do next after we've done our pre?
We do the cooking class.
Thank you. Yes, Ricky. That's all I was saying. That's why I was like, think really simple. So then we do
No,
the cooking
that's
class.
pretty fair. That was
Yeah, it's
right
pretty-
there.
yeah, no, it's always the does that are the hardest
Mhm.
sometimes. And this is a good example because this is what happens a lot during comps, over and over, is that people ask, like, then we try to throw like really easy questions and people think, oh, it's got to be something more complex. And it's actually just the answer that you know it's the answer. So yeah, this is a good example to practice for that. Okay, now we've done the cooking class. What do we do? Again, simple, Mamoon. What do we do after we've done our cooking class?
So after doing the intervention,
Yeah.
okay, after doing the intervention, we do the post test or collect the data.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Yep, post test with everybody. All right, Bryce, sorry, you're next. And this one is a little bit, this is just a tiny bit harder because of the design we have, because there's a wait list control group. What do we do next? And you can phone a
I
friend
guess
if you'd like.
I guess like after the post test, what would you do?
Yep, after the post test.
Like statistical analysis, I guess.
True, when you're thinking from this researcher perspective, I'll give you a pass there and say yes, that would be reasonable to start your statistical analysis, that you're doing. But what else? What do we do next, Meg, with this design?
Since it's a wait list,
Yeah.
bringing people off the wait list to do the experiment.
So what do?
They'll go to the intervention.
Exactly. Yeah. So they'll do the cooking class. Yeah. And then this is an interesting issue because often in research, and I need to ask somebody else what their opinion on this is, but very, very often in the research, we will then do, so say it was we said 12-week. So say it was a 12-week cooking class, just best practices. There are references that you can get that show you that interventions are for behavior change. We need a 12-week intervention to have effective behavior change. Yeah. So you'll get dinged if you have to go lower. You need to have a good reason than the less than 12 weeks. Anyway, so you did your pre-test, you did 12 weeks of intervention with your intervention group, and then you do the post-test with everybody, and then you do a 12-week intervention with your control group, and then very often we'll do another post-test with everybody, because what that gives us is a couple things. Not only are we able to see, again, kind of confirming that that works with a group, right? Because now you can see that both groups would have changed. But you're able to now see, what am I seeing with my intervention group? And this doesn't seem right, but it goes back to Bryce. I thought I just talked to you, but anyway, what are we, by doing that now 12 weeks later, so it's 24 weeks from the pre-test, then they did the intervention, they did post-test. Now it's 12 weeks later and they're doing a post-test. What can we see with that intervention group?
I'm not sure if I understand what you're asking.
Okay, we'll pass the ball to a friend. Anybody?
I would think you would hope change.
Well, it could be more change. That's a possibility, depending on if your cooking test really, if you're
or
cooking,
not.
right. So you're trying to see,
proven. Sorry.
yeah, I would hope at least that those changes are maintained. I mean, very often we'll see a bump up in changes after an intervention, but the question is, do they actually maintain out? So by looking, that intervention group had nothing going on for that 12 weeks after their post test, and by doing another survey, you're able to see, did those changes that we observed in the initially, did those hang on, and did they stay around for the 12 weeks? So there's some benefits there, because not only are you able to see if those changes stay around, but then with that, you've got a second group where you actually did the intervention as well. So you're able to kind of replicate and see if you still see those changes, right? So it's kind of a nice design there. There's a lot of depth there. Basic. I swear y'all move around or something on me. Because this goes to Meg, and this is so easy. Don't think complex on this. So why are we doing the control group at all? What could have happened in life that we might need a control group for?
People learned to cook.
Because give me a crazy possible example.
Because they moved out of home.
Oh, that's an interesting one. If they were all the same age and they were moved out of home, that's an interesting thing you definitely want to look at in your target audience or priority population and timing of it. So if you had picked young adults who are just finishing high school, because that's an interesting group, right? And they're just going to be going into college. And that'd be a nice thing to be able to follow. Anyway, and so you do the 12 weeks during summer, then do your post test right before they go to college. It's really not that next 12 weeks is where you're going to see the difference, though. So that wasn't the
I was thinking like moving out, they might have like access to a kitchen for the first time. Or new, maybe they didn't come from a place where they had access and they would in a dorm if they're going to college or moving.
Right. Yeah. If you have, yeah. So yeah. And what you're both getting, touching on, which is really important, is that I think that, the reason why we run the control group is because if there is something else going on in the world and the environment that causes change in that variable of interest, if we don't have a control group, we won't catch that. And we'll think that the changes we observed in our intervention group were because of our intervention, but it was actually because of something else in the world that was going on. Like, for instance, if there was a new social program that gave everybody cooking supplies, and that happened to occur during the time that you were doing your intervention. And so that you might see increases in cooking, but it not be about your cooking intervention. Is actually because they all got all these great supplies. But by having a control group, you would see the same bump up in the control group. And then, although we ran an experimental design to look at this, what's something we could put on at the end to understand the changes? That goes to Sam. What's another kind of arm of the project that we could add on to understand what we see?
To understand if we see changes in what?
Yeah, change whatever the changes were. What's another design we can add on? Something else we can add on to our design that we would do at the end to be able to understand the changes we observed or lack of.
I mean, if you're maybe doing a cooking class for like iron deficient women, I mean, you could couple that with like blood serum levels, I guess, if you wanted to.
Yeah, definitely. If you want better measurements, that's good. You're going that quantitative, very objective, which is wonderful. Whenever we have, that's something I strongly encourage you to always look for. So if we did the survey that's self-reported, if you can have any objective measures in your pre-post, that's really, really, really good. On the other end, especially I guess because we don't always have something. Sometimes we don't have the money to do something like objective like blood draws, and sometimes it's what we're studying is not something that's easily objectively measured, like family meal times or something. I think as we move into tech, we're going to have more and more easy ways to actually measure things like that, which is interesting. So wow, just now I came up with a whole research design that somebody needs to do where it's like one of those little owls that records, they're expensive right now. A few years they'll get cheaper. But imagine that your intervention was to have increased family time, and then you had that little thing that sat in the middle of the table, and then it activates on its own when it sees people sitting around the table, and then it could actually objectively measure family meal times. That's cool. Sorry, sidetrack. Hopefully I can get back to the actual question. And that's what I do constantly, by the way. I hope you guys start doing that whenever you hear something you like think from the research perspective, what could they do? It's really fun to live life with like these puzzles. Anyway, so what was my question? That'll be that. Ricky, what was I asking you?
Yeah, no, I have a question. There was something, and I've swapped my note-taking method, and I was
Okay.
looking for it. But I thought you were asking, there was something that you had mentioned that some designs don't do this. This was a few days ago, or I guess weeks
Uh-huh.
ago.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
A lot of designs will leave this part out, but this is a really good measure to take to make sure it's valid. What
Oh,
was
face validity. Face
Yeah.
validity. Yeah.
Yep.
So face validity would have come way at the beginning of this project before we did our pre-post
Okay, so
surveys.
it would already
And
be implemented.
yeah, in an ideal research world, you would actually check even if a tool is already validated. In an ideal world, you would actually like do a project where at the beginning you would have a bunch of people in the priority population take the survey, and so that way you can run some internal analysis to make sure it still works for this population, and then also doing with about 5 people at least doing face validity to make sure the words still work, or there's nothing, so your audience understands the way you think, the way
Is that
you're
kind of,
interpreting it.
I apologize. Is that kind of like what Meg and I actually did a research project together last semester where we had to run the whole thing, which was redoing a bunch of neat lessons through
Mhm.
Word and processing to make sure it wasn't above fifth grade reading level? Is that kind of the
That's
same? I feel like I'm always
it's in the
thinking
same
in
phase.
this like
Yep, it's in the
mirrored.
same phase. Yep, that would be in that phase where you're developing the tool.
Okay,
So that would be completely great part of that validity phase if you're
cool.
checking your tools, which ideally you should be doing.
Yeah, that
So
would
yeah.
be done by now. Yeah. Thank you though
Well, no, I
for
mean, yeah, ideally, I'm just saying, ideally, that would always happen every time somebody picks up a validated tool. Ideally, in research, everybody would always use a validated tool or spend a lot of time creating the validated tool. But anytime you use a validated tool with a new population, you're not the researcher who did it with your population where they live. So if you had validated a tool up in Rhode Island, and it happened to be all done at Rhode Island with, elementary school kids, with let's do adults. So adults cooking, and you develop somebody developed this validated tool in Rhode Island, and now you're using that same tool and it's valid. So it's got references, and you can just say, I'm using da 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 tool, and you're using it down down in Tennessee. We may have differences in our population to where that tool no longer really works. It doesn't, it's a simple thing. You can do a Cronbach's and it doesn't hold together. We don't tend to do that in research because of time and resources.
No, that's kind of what's interesting is, and I'm so sorry that I'm always like, well, clinically, and I don't mean to be that way, but that's kind of exactly what I've done for 2+ years, is literally work with those like FQH-3, like all of the validated tools and in clinical work. And so
and some do not hold together.
No, absolutely. So it's that part of it is so important. And I think seeing that whole picture really makes so much sense why we're so very much like, this is what we use. This is kind of, and even if you use different standards, they're all kind of in the same wheelhouse typically. So that's just very cool to see.
It is. Yeah. There's a lot of that's in best practices, and the more that we can pull in a study reasonably, the better. But for time and for cost and everything else, we just don't often see that. Most of the time, what's still good practices, not best, but good, is that that you run a Cronbach's on your data afterwards to make sure the tool did still hold together. And that's why you'll see a lot of publications will actually show you the Cronbach's with the population just to be able to show the tool still worked. Nothing they could do about it if it didn't. But anyway, no, but and I think you'll like what I was actually trying to lean toward.
Cronbach's?
Cronbach's, Cronbach.
I don't, and I'll look it up. I don't mean to make you. I'm not trying
to
spell check you.
Cronbach's alpha. Cronbach. I think it is. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I think most of you will like this last piece that I'm hinting for here, is actually adding in some qualitative work at the end is usually very, very helpful if you have the time and the money and the space to do this. So if you had done all this work with this cooking class and then it had not worked at all, it's very hard to publish null results. And that's biased, not only because it's just more exciting. And remember, they even want the articles, the publishers want people to want to read their articles, so that's how they stay in business, how they make money. So there's that bias toward only publishing, positive results. But the other thing is, it's very hard to prove a null. You have to have really good research design to be sure it wasn't you that messed something up, as opposed to it really doesn't exist. So anyway, but the thing is, if you do have no results, but if you've done qualitative research, you might have some really interesting findings in why people didn't change. And then that I think is really valuable information to get at afterwards. But even if you have positive results, it's still really valuable to learn more about why they did change. And we do some things like, because you can do focus groups, you can do interviews, and we'll talk about qualitative next week, I think. But you can also do ripple effect mapping. So these kinds of qualitative things can be less structured, they can be more structured. There are all sorts of different choices you can make there, but it's just nice to be able to understand our RCT results with a qualitative follow-up is a really strong way to go. Okay, so anyway, that was all the 2 bullets first. I will move forward, I promise. So we do need to control for as many other factors that might be making this change occur as possible. So you'll do that with statistical analysis and making sure that you think about it a priori, so beforehand, and you include enough an assessment to where you're going to be able to catch those other factors that might be that you were not expecting to be confounding. Okay, so let's see what else Yeah, there are also times things to say about these two because these are, like I said, so basic, so important. There are times where it's just not. I said control is so important, but there are times where it's not ethical to have a control group, or that you will find that you read some studies where they're going and they're doing the study and they actually stop the study because they find such good results. Like for instance, say we were all dying. This group was dying from some disease and you found out with your intervention group that you had amazing results. Well, you're not going to just keep going with your intervention, for the point of the statistical analysis and not give out this treatment to the other half that got randomized to, control group. So there are times where you either don't have a control group or you have to stop one. So uh, you can still have, you can actually even have more levels to your experimental group. That way you can compare like two different types of treatment at the same time and then still have a control group. That helps you pull out what's actually causing, the change to occur. And hold on, your faces are in front of what's on here. Control group can be called control group. Some people call it can be called standard treatment. It can be comparison group, which is a slightly different meaning there, but hold on, drink water. No, thank you. Okay, sorry. So so the control group, the other thing besides the wait list that's often very kind and good practice to do is to this is not so much about their experience, it's more of your making sure your experiment was, your findings. When you find positive results, you can really say it's because of your treatment, your experiment. Does anybody know what we would add in to, it's like between the pre and the post, and it's for our experimental group, not for our experimental group, for our experimental control group, what could we do to the control group that would help our design to make it even better? Okay, so lots of thinking. I'm gonna go with Mamoon. So I think I'm out of order here. Mamoon, what could we possibly do with our control group that's going to help this design be stronger?
Is it something like complex or something simple? I,
It's relatively simple, but it's still a little bit more than just it's,
I think a
in fact,
per-
yeah, so
perfect control group will be like similar characteristics with the intervention group.
true. True. Yep, we could be doing that. Goes back to our sampling methodology and whether or not we actually like use matching. That'd be amazing if we did matching, because then your control and your intervention group look completely the same at baselines. That way you really can test, you know, you're pretty confident in that if you see changes in your experimental group, that's true. But this is something that you can be doing during, so between pre and post
Also, I can
with your
uh,
control
l-
group.
like for the intervention group, if I do like uh, Mediterranean diet education guidance, I think I will give the control group general health education guidance, like kind of similar thing.
Okay, so I'm going to help somebody. This is going to pop up and be too obvious, but okay, let's pretend your example you just gave us for the experimental design. You're going to help people follow a Mediterranean diet for this 12-week period. And so you've decided you're going to work with older adult populations who are experiencing depression. They're over 70. They're experiencing depression after their loved one has passed, and you're checking to see if changing the diet can help improve the depression. Um, and so you go in and you've got to make sure they're doing this Mediterranean diet. So you actually bring them their food every day. So it's a nice controlled the feeding study. So you have these things of food in these packages, and you bring them in, you put them in the fridge, you take out the ones from the previous, you actually weigh out, you're doing great, lots of money to do this. And you see that your treatment group has just amazing changes in depression and your control group does not. What could be going on here? Marissa. Sorry. Oh, Ramon, do you already know? Sorry.
I think I was thinking like if I am providing them the food, they kind of have
Mhm.
food. But if I don't provide food to the control group,
True. Okay, that's different. I didn't go there. That would be, you're right. That's going to be a problem as well in terms of food security
food security,
and
yeah.
even access to food and all of those things. Yep, introduced those issues. What else could be going on, Marissa?
I was thinking about like the environment in which they can cook in, if they all have the same pots and pans, if they
Okay,
need to
those are
be
all, yeah.
provided anything.
Okay, those are all things to be thinking about. Again, in his version, it's the foods are already pre-prepared. You know, they're already
Okay.
ready to go. So we're not gonna have that for early start intervention group as an issue. Bryce, what do you think? What else could be going on?
Like I was thinking, I guess like daily schedule. Some individuals could, work at night. Some could,
Well,
work at day. So I guess access and
okay,
times they could eat.
and maybe they are. These are over 70-year-olds. We'll pretend they're all
Oh,
retired, but that's a
okay,
great point.
okay.
That is a great point because if you've got some people working and some people not, that's a another thing you want to control for. So that you
I guess.
see how those inclusion exclusion criteria keep growing, right? As you start to really think about all the things that could impact. Let me put it this way: Mamoon is so sweet and he's so wonderful. Mamoon, when you go in and you see Mrs. Johnson and she's just lost her husband and she's so sad, and you're bringing her food, what are you probably going to do when you come in?
I think I'm going to console him. And like
Yeah.
when someone get the care or attention,
Uh-huh.
it can make a change for them.
Exactly. Yeah. So I would actually guess that if you did go in person to just your intervention group and end up spending an hour with them, even just talking about what diet they're supposed to have, a couple times, not to mention that just every time you drop off the food and you console them, that can have a huge impact on depression with our older adults. Yeah, Ricky, what you thinking?
Would we see if it's ethical? Or would we already know that? Would that be
Yeah,
something we could see? Because I
I mean,
imagine if it's not, we would stop. But I guess you kind
right.
of covered that with like, if we have a control group, sometimes we can't have a control group because it's not ethical. So I feel like
Yeah,
you
I,
kind of
I don't think
mentioned
I
that.
think they would. I think this would not cross that boundary of it not being of it being unethical. I think there are ways you could improve this by doing like a Meals on Wheels version, so that way they've already been receiving these meals for a long time in the same way from the same people, and you just have half the meals change, to this Mediterranean diet to see if that so that way you are controlling for more factors, right?
So have
Because
a
if you
really strict population that you're kind of collecting data from to be able to compare from, even though it wouldn't give us like, I know we were talking about in of a study being higher, giving us more results sometimes. This is kind of the opposite thought, but it's still worthy data because all
Yeah,
data
it's
is
definitely worthy
worthy.
data. But I don't think it has to be a small sample size here, especially if you did the Meals on Wheels route as opposed to
Okay,
just
I
on
guess
meals.
yeah, it doesn't have to be. That's fair.
Right, right. But the main thing I'm trying to get to, which I think I made it very complicated example, so it took a while to get to, is that you time matching. That very often, if you're spending time with your participants in the intervention group, it's possible that just that time you're spending with the participants, that is enough to change outcomes. So in other words, Mamoon spending time with those older adults was enough to make them less depressed. But he could, in his results, have positive results with that intervention group, no changes with the control, and be like, hey, Mediterranean diet's the way to go. It changes depression, which has a huge impact, on what people do and cost and intake, and it could have some unintended consequences. When in reality, it was, hey, if you can go spend an hour a day with an older adult, um, that's going to reduce depression. So the way you would do that is you would do a time matching. It's you would have the same people, hopefully, ideally on the same schedules, as close as possible, and flip flop, spend that hour with our older adults, but around something else, not around food. So maybe it's either talking about asking them questions about their childhood, or which, again, that's a pretty big intervention. So you're definitely going to, now you're putting your intervention in risk, just because that might be emotionally so amazing what you're doing with your control group that affects depression more. Or maybe it's an hour a day cleaning, which is a little bit less. But then again, if you have a clean environment, that can impact depression levels. Do you see how I'm trying to get you guys, whenever you're thinking about your study, it's great to sit around with a group like this and just talk and think about all the things that possibly could be going on that you need to control for in some way. And that's the most important part of research at the beginning, is to think about these things. And just a comment for Sam's in terms of comps. The great news is, if you think of something right now with a day to go, don't change everything. Just talk about it when you get to your comps. You have your time between the time between when you turn in your comps and when you talk to your committee. And this is for anybody else who's going to be doing this. You have time to think about it. You still have your document, so you have time to think about it, and you can come up with new ideas and then talk to your committee about it. Oh, while I was during this time, I was thinking this might have been better, and that's okay. So anyway, remember that you have to have at least 2 levels within intervention. If it does not vary, it's not a variable. Okay, so it has to have at least 2 levels to anything that you're intervening on. Okay, there are 5 different types of experimental design, and it goes, the worst type, so to speak, is a post-only control group design. It still technically could be intervention, but you're only testing at the end. This would be, you would only want to do something like this where, when the test itself, it could impact behavior going forward. And there'd have to be a really good reason, and not just because of time and money, but to make the post only worth it. Most common general pre-test, post-test control group design, which we've been talking about. Now, today we'll run through Solomon, randomized experimental design with matching, which we've referred to a couple times over the past few weeks. And then we'll talk about crossover or within subjects, randomized. And that's what we'll cover right now. And I'm going to be using these REXO just to be able to shorthand to talk about the experiments. So in this case, you still have randomization, because we were talking about experimental design. So you could be randomizing people to, what they're going to be doing. In group one, you would have the R is the randomization. This is group 1, it's on the top. E is for some sort of oops, Ricky left and came back. Okay, the E is the treatment or experiment. The experimental group, excuse me, that's what they're randomized to, the experimental group. Whereas C, they would be randomized to the control group, is what that means. And then you've got the X, that's the actual treatment. And then this tilde in front of the X means no treatment. And then in this design, when I have the zeros, it means that's when you do an observation or like your survey. So this I don't know what you call it. This figure, it's not a figure. What is this? Anyway, this is a shorthand way of being able to show you what a post-test only control group design looks like. And I'm so sorry, I should have, oh dear. I will call him back. Okay. And I will turn this off. I do not usually get calls from him. I hope everything's fine. Okay, so anyway, I've talked about that this is not a great design. Have to have a really good reason for this, that you first, you're going to randomize your participants to either be intervention or control. That's the E or the C. And then there's some sort of intervention, which is the X, and that's with one group only, and then both are assessed again at the end, which is the O, the observation. Okay, that makes sense, what you're seeing in front of you? So, yeses. So moving forward to where it's a little bit more complex. I think I just did it. All right, yeah. Okay, so Marissa, can you walk us through then post-test comparison group design?
Yeah, with the post-test only comparison group design, is that
I think I made a mistake there. Um, because here it shows that they're both getting treatments and they're both getting observations. So
yeah.
something wrong there. And how did I do that? Oh, I know what I was supposed to be. Duh. Sorry. I'm being a ditz. I apologize. I'll explain it for you because this will make more sense. And this, you have to have the name to be able to understand really kind of what they're doing, sort of. And this is if we have two different interventions. So it's still not it's not a great design at all because of the fact that you don't have the pre, and then you don't have a control group here. But what you could have is two different interventions. So say you have two different drugs to treat, hypertension. You could randomize, so you're still randomizing, and it's still you're doing an experiment because you're giving people a drug. So, but you randomize people to be group 1 or group 2. In group 1, they receive this treatment. And in group 2, they receive this treatment. And then to see if you have differences in blood pressure between those two groups. So I tend to go to blood pressure when I want an easy one, just because it's something that's so like, yes, no, did it have an impact? Because it's so objective and kind of easy to talk about the design in terms of that blood pressure effect with a pill. What I encourage you to do as you think about your own designs, if you can think about them as if they were blood pressure and a pill, would it still make sense the way you have it designed? Is sometimes easy. I don't know if you can reverse engineer your work sometimes to think about it that way. If it doesn't work, don't worry about it. But if it's a helpful way to clean that up. So one of the things about the thing about randomization that's important is that if you have a large enough sample size, in general, rule of thumb tends to be about 30 is what we hear a lot. And if we know that our sample participants are basically, we've got some homogeneity there, that they're the same, right? Which is good because we want to see the treatment effect. Then we can be pretty confident that the randomization itself has produced equivalent groups. Because we kind of talked about that when we were talking about quasi and before, as you can get a pretty good study going if you look at baseline and they really are equivalent groups, even though they weren't randomized. It gives you a lot more confidence in a non-RCT work. And sometimes you have to have non-RCT. So the goal of trying to get to that equivalent groups is what it's all about. And this way, if you have a large enough sample size, just recognize that you'll have equivalent groups if you randomize. If you have a very small sample size, or if it's like very heterogeneous, meaning it's got lots of different characteristics, then even random assignment's not necessarily going to give you equivalent groups. If the people who you manage to recruit are so different, that they're just going to have different outcomes with the treatment. Hold on. Sorry. I need to learn to drink water while y'all are talking. That would make sense. But I'm listening so hard that I don't think to do that. Okay, let's go to our next better test design. So Marissa, I'll give this one to you again since I gave you a hard one last time that didn't make sense because I hadn't given enough information. Describe this to us.
Yeah, with the post-test control group design, they're randomized into either the experimental or the control group. Both the experimental and control group receive the pretest. The experimental group receives the intervention, and then both groups receive the post-test afterwards.
Yep. So yeah, that's the most common type of randomized design, experimental design that you're going to find out there. Does anybody have any questions about that? So remember, this is where we come into what we were talking about before, some of the problems that can occur even in this good design. Some of the things that you're going to want to think about is that, like, for instance, if there's a long time between the pre-test and the post-test, and say we were going back to that cooking example, we asked people, do you want to be in this cooking class? And they got told, well, you might get to go into this cooking class for free. It depends on, we'll let you know. And then they got randomized to the the control group. And so we might lose them, just because they're kind of irritated that they didn't get to go to the class. And if you don't do a wait list, we also, just if it's a long time, you're more likely to lose people and they don't come back, right? So, and you may have less people potentially on your post test, and that's a carryover effect that can occur there. That can also be if the way that the people in your control group, I should make y'all explain what you think I'm saying when I say the carryover effect, but it's that when you take that pre-test, your control group, the test itself may impact the way they respond on the post-test. So you may see some changes that carry over from the pre-test that make it look like they're changes in the post-test in their behavior, but it's not. It was just carried over from when they took the pre-test. And sometimes a pre-test can be enough to change behavior. It might make them start thinking about something, hydration or Ian does colorectal cancer risk, and so if this survey is about, foods that you would eat or not eat with colorectal cancer, then maybe it gets you thinking afterwards. You go look it up and then you're like, oh, then you read something and then you change your behavior. So again, it would make it to where it's the actual, a survey is what caused the impact there, changing it. But it would still give you a chance to know how much your intervention affected people there, if it was the intervention itself, because both intervention and control will get that, and you'd see the same increase theoretically in both groups. So again, if you have that rule of thumb of trying to have at least 30 in each group, there is a reference for that, but definitely talk to your committee, talk to people, how much they feel about that. But if you have 30 people, they're very homogeneous, then you could theoretically, if your pre-test has such an impact, it could be better to actually do the post-test only control group design. Remember, I said you have to have a good reason. That would be a good reason. All right. Here's another way we handle it. If we're worried, I'm giving you some hints because I'm going to call on somebody for this. So another thing we can do if we're really worried about our assessments impacting is, and Rebecca, sorry, you are next on this. I know you just came in, so you might have to phone a friend. We'll see. This is called a Solomon for group design. I don't see this as often as I would like to see it, actually, just because I think it's a pretty good design. But that's, I think, primarily for time and money. Or maybe people just don't think about it. Can you describe to us what you think, what is happening in a Solomon for group design?
For the first group, I think the participant gets the pre-test, the intervention, and the post-test. For
Correct.
the second group, the participants get the intervention and the post-test only without the pre-test. And I think it's for them to be able to prove that the intervention might work even without the pre-test. So the third group is that the participant gets the pre-test and no intervention and the post-test. For the fourth group, the participant gets no intervention and only post-test.
Yeah. So all of that was exactly correct. The only thing I would tweak just slightly is that the purpose of it is really, it's about the researcher being able to figure out the effect that the pre-test had on the post-test is why you would do this study design. But it's that extra cost in human resources. It's less commonly done just because it's more work. You've doubled your work basically, right? So, okay.
Did you say it's to isolate the pre-test or the post-test?
Pre-test.
Okay.
Because we're not, because everybody gets post-test, but we want to know. Yeah. So what this lets us know for sure. Yeah, this lets us know for sure if it's done well, and that it was the pre-test. If the pre-test is having an effect, it will let us know if the pre-test is having an effect or if it's all the intervention. And sometimes it can be, because sometimes the pre-test is having some impact, but the intervention still has more impact. So you would be able to see that really clearly here if you did this. So that's Solomon, but takes more time, takes more resources. The next one that's more complex for the researcher, but it's a great design, is a randomized experimental design with matching. So, Bryce, you are up. Can you describe what you see here, what you think you see here, and why?
So it doesn't look like there's a pre-test or a post-test, but I still see, I guess,
No,
the X, or is that what the O's are?
So the O's stand for observations, which are really, this is the pre-test, and then this is the post-test. And the X is the treatment. Okay, so keep going.
So there's the intervention group and then the control group. I don't really know what the MR would stand for though.
Perfect. So toss it to phone a friend. Who's going to talk to about the MR?
You want me to pick, or just?
Yep. You get well, no, you get to ask somebody to. Yeah, y'all are probably too young to know the phone a friend thing. I don't remember what that was on.
I guess
I'm not.
you're worldly. You're well exposed. But I think you're the only one. Is there anybody else who knows the phone a friend?
Anyone else?
Game show?
It's Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Come on.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We just filmed it.
Okay. So Bryce, you get to.
I guess Ricky, because she has her mic on.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so can you ask the question one more time?
So what is the MR? Is what he's asking about. Tell us what's the MR about?
Is that where we have the pre-test and the post-test?
No, but good guess.
Okay.
Toss it to somebody else with a
lifeline. Sam. Sorry if you're not ready. I'm not looking at our visual.
You're fine.
Good. So with this one, we have pairs of people. So then we randomize the people in the pairs.
So how do we make the pairs?
So it's based on like a similar characteristic between the people. So like you can match like people that are the same age, or like people that like scored the same on a test or something.
Yeah. And you can get really specific with it. I mean, it depends on how many characteristics you want to test for and how many you worry about being confounding and how many you want to control for. So you can try to have people who look exactly the same on a whole battery of, characteristics. And that's great. That means it's almost like having the same person, both, taking the treatment and not the treatment at the same time. That's amazing, right? The hard part with this matching is kind of obvious in terms of recruitment can be a real challenge. So, because recruitment's always a challenge, so it's resources, it's difficult. It's, and then to find people who are just alike. And then what if you've got like almost everybody covered, but now you have these two other people who you just can't find matches for, and it can be challenging. So that's why if you have a whole bunch of characteristics, it's harder to do. If you have like a single characteristic, like Sam was saying, if it's a score on a test or a height, they're 6 foot, 6 foot. That we're looking at something that we think wouldn't be impacted by height. Maybe it's shopping experience, because what we visually see is different. And throwing out things again, always thinking research is fun. So we have something we can do instead of matching that gets to that same issue of trying to have lower resources, or requiring lower resources to be able to find out the outcome. And look at my notes, see if there's anything else. I have to pull it up. I feel like there's something else I wanted to say here. I guess not. Okay. Bring it back away so I can see everything. Sorry, hold on a second. Okay. So excellent. And now I've changed the size because I moved y'all around, and I don't remember who I called on last. I think it was Bryce, and he went to Sam. So I think this goes to Marissa. My squares moved. Can you describe to us what we see here?
Yeah, so for the crossover design or the within subjects randomized experimental design, participants will be exposed to two conditions at two different time points. They'll be randomized to that. In order one, they'll get exposed to the first condition first. They'll do a test or a washout period, typically within that middle section, and then they will not get exposed to condition 2, and then they'll get a post-test at the end. And for being randomized into order 2, they'll be not exposed to condition 1, they'll be exposed to the washout or that test in the middle, and then they will get exposed to condition 2, and there'll be a post-test at the end.
And Mamoon, what are some of the problems that we could have with this design? Because it's a great design, but what could go wrong that would make it harder, not give us good results?
One problem that I can think about is like when we introduce them with the intervention, they already know about that, like they have some knowledge or practice. So when they act as a control group, they may still do that, and that can influence the result and bring some bias.
And yeah, I think you're talking about what I'm trying to say. That so if they are the only thing that you have to really, well, not the only, there's lots of things to think about, but one of the most important things is what Mamoon I think is getting at. It's called carryover effect. And that's where the intervention itself, once you remove your active researcher, I'm doing this intervention from that person's life, it's still left, that outcome that changed, it stays. It doesn't just go back to baseline. So that you usually have a washout period in between your, from the time you've done the intervention. So one group did the intervention, other group not do the intervention. And then you have your tests, and then you have a washout period that's not shown on here, but that's going to be in between that test 1 and the next condition, and sometimes it could be a few weeks. But if it's something where the change doesn't actually go away, then that's going to be a problem, and you're not going to be able to see, and that you'll be able to tell when you do your observations. If you did observations, so you could mix this up, because you could do, and we'll get into this I think in the next slides, where we do kind of like a time series where you can do condition 1 with the 2 groups. You can do test 1 or observation 1, and then you can wait the 4 weeks that you think it's going to take for that to wash out, and you can actually do the same survey again and make sure they're back to baseline, and then flip it over and do condition 2, and then check that outcome, and then again kind of seeing where it washes out. So this is a better example of this kind of thing, is like I said, that the blood pressure meds just works beautifully for everything, because even here, that's something you expect to go back to baseline, right? So you've got all these people who have hypertension. That's your inclusion criteria. You're going to keep them as homogeneous as you can, from when you're recruiting, your inclusion exclusion criteria, and then you randomize them to the, one gets his blood pressure medicine, one doesn't. I don't think this goes by IRB. I don't know how you feel about it, but so we leave one group with hypertension, We have the other group receive the medication. The blood pressure on the test comes down for the ones that got the treatment. The other one still has hypertension. Aren't you a good person, researcher? And then you're going to switch it, take away the medicine, and then you're going to give the medicine to the other group and not to the you switch who gets the medicine, and you clearly see every time you give the medicine, blood pressure comes down. Pretty not nice design. Okay. Any other questions on this? Otherwise, we're going to take about a 10-minute break. Get you to stand up, walk around.
I think Bryce Rivers asked a question on the chat
Thank you
for the previous.
Oh yes, factorial is fun. We'll be talking about that. Yes. So blind them don't tell. Okay, would this design not be too similar to a comparative or associative design? The difference there, Bryce, is that we're actually intervening. So we're in a comparative and associational. The researcher does not manipulate the intervention, does not do an intervention. And in this case, we're actually doing an intervention. So that's the difference.
Right. I guess what I was just confused on was I guess there was similar qualities between that Solomon design and the two, but
well, and all of to be honest, all of the things we talked about today, if you think about a comparative design, it's very similar. In reality, the problem is because in a comparative design, you are not putting people into groups, and you're not deciding who gets treatment and doing a treatment to one group and to another. And so, in other words, in trying to find causality, the things that actually cause the people to group naturally may be something else. But yes, statistically, it looks like it's the outcome you're trying to look at, where that was a spurious relationship and it's not the actual causal relationship. So that's why in an experimental design, you can control for that by randomizing, having a large enough sample size, and then randomizing groups and people to groups. You're going to control for it possibly being something else spurious. That's just the main. It's actually, and that's a great point. I mean, it really is a very small difference, if that makes sense. It's just that it really is an important difference in terms of causality. I don't know if I said all that well enough. Any other thoughts? Okay. All right, let me stop sharing and let you guys go for 10 minutes. I will see you back here. I'll be here so you can say something if you want to. Okay, go ahead, come back when you can. Oh, and I recorded all the way through that. Sorry, whoever had to sit through 10 minutes of silence watching me do things on my computer. Fun. Hopefully they just haven't took a break along with it. All right, so we're going to jump in and talk about quasi, and I'll keep it to an hour. The plan is I'll keep it to an hour and then break. Well, actually less than an hour because I went over last time, and then break, and then we'll come back, and then you guys will report your summary of your article, and then we'll do the research design. And as a group, we're going to try it just talking about any changes we would suggest making together. Okay. Cool. All right. Let me know if you have any questions. I am going to share my screen. I promise, because it's going to work. There we go. All right, can you guys see the slides?
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah. All right, I'm going to do the same thing where I'm not going to make them I'm not going to make them large just because then the voice automatically plays. That's what this. Oh, you know what? I did not pull up. Give me 1 second. See if I can find. Never seen that sign. It says, please move this away from the shared window. It's fun to have new things. Hold on. All right, so same terminology that we used on the last one, with the R and the O being the observation, or in the intervention, X, E, and C, and the matching. Yeah, do you like my alarm? Yes. And the matching, the only thing that's new on here, well, I don't think we had NR last time, obviously, because it was only experimental, so we're randomizing everyone. This is NR is non-random assigned to the group, random assignment to the group. And that is new for it. So the thing to understand is all quasi-experimental designs have no random assignment of participants. So you can still be assigning groups, but not the participants to the groups. And there are going to be 3 different examples that we're going to talk about. Again, with the first one being the weakest possible design, and that's the one group post-test only design. I don't even think I had that on the last one. It's just one group because it was experimental. So you have to have experimental. So with experimental, you have to have one group. But in quasi, you technically can have a one group post-test only design where you do intervention with just one group. And then, yeah. So it's not don't do that unless you absolutely cannot do something else. So the next stronger choice is where is a little bit better to have a one group with a pre-test post-test design. But then obviously the strongest is going to be the post-test only non-equivalent groups design. So that non-equivalent groups design is what tells you that it's quasi-experimental design. So that's what that means. So if you see that, then you know what you've got. Okay, so Mamoon, hey, you get the easy one. Tell us what you see here. The first up.
So for the one group posters only, we have non-randomized group, then we have the experiment, then there is the intervention, then there is the observation.
And technically the E stands for experimental group.
Right. Yeah.
And they're all in an experimental group. So
there's
it just
only
means
one.
experimental group. And then you do the treatment and then you do the observation. Correct. Yeah, not very pretty, huh? Okay, so moving on. Meg, sorry, you're next if you'd like to go. Don't have to. What do we see here with a one group pretest post-test design?
It's this was funny. I think I did my research summary on it, and it was really hard to find articles like studies that did this because it was really hard to say. Um, just because you don't do that baseline pretest, you
No,
can't.
this one does have a pretest
Oh, this
though.
is pretest protest. Sorry, I thought we were still on
No,
post-test
it's
only.
okay. Sorry.
My bad. So you have the
Nope.
non-randomization, and then
Yeah.
you have the experiment group, and then you do the pretest, and then you have the intervention, and then you do your post-test.
Exactly. Correct. And so this is going to be more commonly done when we have new interventions in community-based settings, for instance. But does anybody, so actually it's on here, the internal validity, I think this is the first time we've talked about this semester. And that's that threat that undermines your ability to say that there were no other variables that caused the outcome. So you might have great improvements from your pre-test to post-test, but if you've got high, threat to internal validity because there could have been other things that were going on that caused that change. In our example we used earlier, where there was a cooking class and then there was a community program that gave out everybody in the community this amazing kits to use in the kitchen with cooking utensils and educational materials. And so, yes, you saw a great increase in your pre-test, post-test, but you had no idea that that's because there was this community program going on. So it can be from those extraneous environmental events. And then what does, who's next? Oh, Mercy, you're next. What is maturation? How can maturation be an issue here? What does that mean?
Maturation is natural changes that occur in participants over time, things like natural learned abilities and behaviors.
Yeah. And I think we think about this most often when we're dealing with kids, and that they're going to be natural improvements. So like if you measured a child's ability to hop, and you do it at the beginning of one school year, and then your intervention was you were working with the kids all year long on their ability to hop, being silly here. Then the next year at the beginning of the year, you did your post test. You would see incredible improvements in ability to hop, but it possibly was just because they were getting better at hopping because of their age, right? They're naturally maturing. All right. What about carryover effects? That goes to Ricky. Ricky, what do we mean by carryover effects?
So I would imagine that's going to be something that changes that interacts with another variable.
Okay, so tell me, this is specific to this observation one. What do you think can happen? It's more, I'm not sure if carryover effects was the best to use here. But basically, if you've got changes from the observation at the first, I'm sorry, for the pretest, they may carry over and actually be impacting the post-test instead of it being because of your treatment. It's basically what we're trying to say there. I'm going to stay with you, Ricky, because that was kind of a short one. What do we mean about equivalence of groups?
I mean, would that have to do with our demographics and whether we're studying a specific age group or a specific gender identity or whatever that group of people pertains to most?
Yeah, and it's that if you have to use this design, if you and you're studying something that's really important that could change the world, if we can find out that doing this makes such a difference, but say it's drinking this specific tea every morning, changes mood and energy significantly. But it only works for women who are menstruating.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so then we had a nice sample size, but we actually only had a handful of women who were menstruating. And so if you looked at just those individuals, they all had changes. But because we had this large sample size of lots of different other people, it looks like statistically there was no impact of your intervention. But that was because of the design, not because of the intervention. That was
Rather
because
than like a pre-existing, not necessarily condition, but anything that exists for that person individually. So it would interfere, I would think, with the intervention.
Well, it's that if the intervention ends up only being effective with certain people or certain characteristics of people, and you have a very heterogeneous sample size or sample, and you only have a few people who have the characteristics where it's actually going to really work, then you're gonna wash out your ability to see that difference because you've got so many other people where it's not going to make any difference. But the treatment is actually really, really effective, but it's just for certain people. So if you had a very heterogeneous group that all had those similar characteristics, you'd be likely to see that change. It's one of the examples of how science needs to be kind of slow and methodical and really think through this, and theoretically funded enough to be able to check for who it's helping and who it's not, because there are times where something can be really effective with just a certain group of individuals. And if you have this big group, this big wide diverse group, you're not going to see it statistically. That's
why establishing a baseline is so important in any study.
Yes, it definitely it can help, but the problem is the researcher has to not only establish the baseline, but know what to assess. And that can also sometimes be hard depending on what the outcome is.
I guess it's like that we're getting in an equal start in a test, kind of. I see what you're saying, because it's not like overall baseline of a population, but it's like if we're stepping into this cooking class, making sure we all have the same tools, like at our chef's table.
Well, and yes, and a good example for that one is if you're doing the cooking class and you have, say, you've got 30 people in it, since I keep throwing that number out as rule of thumb, that we don't want to go under statistically. Depends on what analysis you're doing. This is why we do power analysis. We'll talk about that later. But and actually, I really do need to bring up more about factorial. I may bring up factorial next time.
Hear your brain going.
Yeah. So with the cooking class, you could have 25 people who love cooking and love working with friends and wants to meet friends in the community. And so they signed up for this cooking class, but they all are actually professional chefs who, since and retired or whatever. So, and you've got 5 people who just don't have a clue how to cook and they've never cooked before. And so when you do your pre-test and your post-test, you're not going to see much movement for your outcome of interest in terms of their confidence or their ability to cook. And that's not because your intervention didn't work. It's because your group was faulty. So, those 5 individuals may have had great increases. At less extreme examples, this is where effect size comes into play. And that if you have something that has a very large effect, which means it's going to have a large change for somebody, then if you can have fewer people actually have that change and you'll still pick it up because it was such a big change that it statistically pulled it enough to where the stats were able to go, oh yeah, there's a change here. If you have a very small change, but still meaningful, you're more likely to miss it if your group's, yeah. Anyway,
thank you for expanding on
sure.
that. That was helpful.
Yeah. Rebecca, what do we mean by attrition?
I think it's when a participant drop out of a
Yes,
group. Yeah.
that's exactly right. And it's one of the things that you want to consider when you're doing your power analysis. So you do your power analysis to figure out how many you have to have in your sample size to be able to know confident or be confident that if there is a change, you're going to statistically pick it up. And all of that's going to be based on previous research that's been done that you then put in the numbers into your, G power or whatever you use to get your sample size. So you get your sample size, but then what some people often forget to do is you need to increase that sample size based on likely attrition levels. So you again look at previous studies of either yourself, which is ideal, especially if it's with that population, or with other people who've worked with that population and they have reported their attrition rates. And that way you can bump up your sample size to account for attrition so that when those people drop out, then you're going to have enough people still in your sample to be able to do the data analysis you want to do. Now, think about some of the issues attrition can add to the group, though, because what if the people who dropped out are people who the intervention was not working for? And the people who stayed in are the ones the intervention was working for. Do you, Meg, what do you think that your statistical take home message would be at the end of your study when you do your data analysis? And that
If
sample.
we had people who drop out that the study wasn't working for?
So if the people who drop out, the attrition rate was pretty high, and it was the people who the intervention just does not work for them. So they left because they're like, oh, that's not working. No, people stayed in are the ones that worked. What are you doing? What's your take home message at the end of
That
your
it
data
looks
analysis
really
look like?
either that the
Yes,
intervention looks really successful.
exactly. But in reality, it's more likely it's only successful for certain
Right.
characteristics of
It's like saying you have a 100% success rate and one person stayed in the study.
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
that
that'd
one
be really
person.
bad. Yeah, that's a great example. But yeah, so accounting for attrition is important. And then you can in analysis either have intent to treat or per protocol. That can also impact your outcomes, because if it's intent to treat, then everybody who was in the study should be used in your data analysis. This is not on your slide, sorry. But whereas per protocol, you only use in your data analysis those who actually followed the protocol, because you're trying to find out if that actual protocol worked, not, were you able to implement the protocol and it worked. So that's another difference there. So this is a better way we can approach this quasi work is it's a little bit better. There's even a best, don't worry, but having a one group pre-test post-test design. So we talked about it earlier a good bit, so I won't go into it a ton here, because this is the concept of having ideally a wait list comparison group. And so you'd have half randomly assigned to wait. The things to think about here, as I mentioned, if it's a really long intervention, you're going to have more people who are likely to drop out, right? And also, I think, and Ricky brought this up, it has to be ethical as well to have those individuals in that, control or comparison arm sitting around and waiting for their intervention to start. So that has to be ethical as well. Anybody have any questions or anything to say about that one? It's kind of straightforward. Okay. All right, let's go to the next one. So the next is, that keeps up getting a little bit better, is having a one group pre-test post-test design. So you still have your wait list group, but you're going to be doing the intervention, and then you have your observation. So basically, this is when we talked about this one actually should not have been with the waitlist comparison, sorry, because here we got the waitlist comparison showing you what it looks like. So I'm just showing you what I was talking about on the previous slide, apologies. Um, so the non-equivalent dependent variables. What do you think, Mamoon, I'm talking about there? Do we have higher or lower number of dependent variables there?
So after reading this, I understand that the characteristics will be different between the variables, and it will, I think, increase the number of the dependent variables.
Yeah. So that we've talked before about the non-equivalent for our independent independent variable. Okay, we're fine. Sorry, I just heard crashing, but I think it's recycling getting dumped. That threw me off. I was like, oh, what just crashed? And basically you can have, if as you have more and more dependent variables, something to be aware of is that as you increase that number, you are more likely to increase heterogeneity there and within those dependent variables as well. That's all we're saying there, I think. And for this one, so post-test only, non-equivalent variable group design. Let's see. Meg, if you're awake, sorry. I hate calling you. I know you're tired. And I'll stop saying that, and that's probably equally annoying. Can you tell us what you see here for this post-test non-equivalent group design?
So they're not randomized. And then you have the experiment and the control. And then one of them does the experiment and control group, and one does the intervention and one doesn't, and they both get observed.
Yes, exactly true. Oops, wait, just exactly right. If I can find it. There you go. Okay, so that was the slide, right, that you were on. There's no pretest in this, so we can get stronger by, I think that's the next slide, I hope. Marissa, what are we going to do to make this a stronger design?
Randomize.
Well, yeah, okay, that would be great. But we're just going to stay in quasi. Sorry, I should have said that. Still
Oh,
quasi,
sorry.
but we cannot randomize for some reason. Cannot randomize. So what can we do to make this design a little bit stronger?
Says only.
Rebecca, what do you think
I don't know.
we possibly could do to make this one a little bit longer? Throw a lifeline.
Oh, so I think there should be a baseline comparison before the experiment.
Yes. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
So yep. So better would be, well, you could have better than the post only non-equivalent groups design is a pretest post-test non-equivalent comparison group design. Yeah. It's pretest post-test. It was too simple. That was the problem. So here's some better quasi-experimental designs. So we've got the pretest post-test non-equivalent comparison group designs. Again, that non-equivalent just means it's not randomized. And so they're not equivalent because randomization, that's what it does for us, is make sure our groups are, equivalent. So there are also 3 different levels of how good these are. So we've got the strongest. I'm flipping this. I had been presenting weak to strong, but the strongest here is where, okay, the participants may not be randomized, but the independent variable is randomly assigned to the treatment. So that's the one where I'm saying you can't put them in which classes they're going to be in elementary school, but you can randomly assign which classes get the intervention and which classes don't. Don't forget to try to time match if you can. So if you're going to go and spend an hour in the classes doing this cool class teaching thing, and then you're going to want to go do a cool class teaching thing for the same amount of time in your control group, if possible, on a different topic, entirely something that would not affect food. Yeah. Okay. So moderate is where it's still quasi, so we still have all of our classrooms. You're not assigning, but in this case, you're not getting to assign either the participants, obviously, or which groups get the treatment. Maybe it's the principal who decides which groups get the treatment based on what the principal knows about the school schedule. So not as good there, right? That can be introducing a lot of bias. And the weakest quasi-experimental design that exists is where you have the participants are not randomized, the treatments are not randomized, and people get to choose which group they're in. And we started talking about this one earlier. So that's a repeat. Now this is different. This I think gets not enough attention. And I'll do the factorial next time. But this is definitely does not get enough time. This is time series designs. I ran into this when I was working with marketing for the first time. It's used more often in things like marketing research. You can have single group time series or multiple group time series. And I think that, and then you can also have two types within those designs. And that you can have, oh, you're so sweet. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. My daughter-in-law made me coffee again. She is so amazing. And it's delicious coffee. Sorry, I can't share. It's amazing. It's decaf. Don't worry. I won't start going faster. Oh, it's good too. So both of your single group and your multiple group time series can have either temporary treatments or they can have continuous treatments. And I really think the easiest way to get to explain this is just to see it, in my opinion. So I'm going to jump right into the single group. So when you're doing this kind of work, what you want to look at first is to make sure that whatever it is that you're measuring, that you're interested in, is stable, that it's not going up and down. And so you're going to be seeing, because you're going to be really looking at patterns and trends. And so you're going to be measuring. I'm trying to come up with a good example off the top of my head, and it's not there yet. So I'll let it come naturally. So hang in there with me. And so you've measured. It's all the same. For some reason, I'm doing peanut butter intake in my brain. I don't know why. So maybe we are now in a preschool setting, and we are looking to see how much. Well, let's move this to carrots because now I can pull this all the way through. So we want to see how much carrots they consume when they're provided carrots as a snack. So your intervention is going to be that you're going to read them a book about this farmer growing carrots. And so you want to make sure that for this group, it's just one preschool class, that their amount of carrots when they're offered that they consume every day is equivalent. And it's not up and down based on some other factors. And so you then, watch the carrot intake, read the book about the carrots, and then afterwards you watch their carrot intake for a while to see what it does. Because ideally it goes up. Now the question is, does it go up on that day when they heard about carrots and then it goes down? You can have the continuous treatment is where you are watching their carrot intake, and then you're reading book about carrots every day. Different books about carrots every day, I guess. You're just continuing the treatment while you're observing the outcomes. And then the next one is a better because you've got a control group. Because in the first one, you didn't have a control group. This one, you do have a control group, which is really nice. So you have the same thing where you can have, we can have watching our carrot intake in one group, watching our carrot intake in the second group, and then we are reading our book about carrots, and then we are watching their carrot intake. And one group did not get read to about carrots, and we're going to see if there's increase in carrot intake. I kind of like this design because it accounts for natural variations that may be occurring in intake. Because there's a chance that you, especially in these kids, that you just pick a day that they eat a lot of carrots, out of the blue. And with this design, you would know that intake varies, so you wouldn't be like, oh, look, there's a change. Because think about it, somebody could do a pre-test. So again, non-randomized, so stay in the quasi world here. But they do a pre-test, that both groups get a pre-test. Then one group gets read about the carrots, and then they, measure both carrot intake for both. But if that naturally just hops up and down and stuff, you like the fact I said hops for the carrots, then you might see an increase that's actually a false. You know, it's what the pattern does anyway. So it is, people are less comfortable with it and less familiar with it, and the stats are a little wonky to run. Let's see if there's anything else I had in my notes about this. No, I did not. Okay, so you're less likely to see it, but it's a really cool, there's some books on it that are really nice if you decide to do anything with time series, that I'd be happy to explore with you. Okay, so I actually got us back on time, which is amazing. So you were back to a 10, or 4 minutes early technically. So I'm going to give you a 15-minute break. And then we're going to come back and we're going to do where you guys are talking about your, we'll do the summaries first of the articles you read, and then we'll do your research designs. Okay? Okay. See you in 15. And I'm going to stop sharing.